Today, we're going to talk about external files in Blender. And as before, I started writing an article. I'm still working on it, but this is already the elephant in the room. If you mess up your external files, you end up in situations like this, where your renders might look like this if you try to share your blend file with other people, or send it off to a render farm like Blender Grid. So it's a bit of a boring topic, external files, but it's important if you want to share your files with other artists to collaborate, or if you want to send it off to something like a render farm or a render service to render it in the cloud or something. So I'm still working on this article, but I thought it was good to do a video so I can actually just show some stuff and also dive into Blender a little bit to show some examples. But yeah, this was one of the splash screens in Blender, and it's one of the demo files that you can download. This is what it's supposed to look like, and this is what can happen if one of the textures is missing. So what I want to focus on mainly is file paths, and then the difference between relative file paths and absolute file paths, and also fixing broken paths. And yeah, it can be a bit complicated, and I've seen people struggle with this while helping our users at Blender Grid. So I know that this is something that people are not always completely familiar with. So that's why I want to dive into it. So file paths. To begin with, let's get clear about what we mean with a file path. If you have a file on your computer and you want to tell someone about where to find that file, or you want to tell Blender where to find that file, you need the file path. And the file path consists of two parts. It's the location of the file and the name of the file. Usually it's like a combination of those two, and the location is generally the directory or folder of where the file is located. But inside of a directory you can have multiple files, so that's why you also need the file name. And that's what we mean with a file path. So what does a file path look like on the different operating systems? They look a little bit different, so that's what I give here. But I first talk about, in Blender, you have two flavors of file paths. You have absolute file paths and you have relative file paths. So absolute file paths are the normal file paths. So let's look at those first. On Windows, let's say you have a banana texture, banana.png. On Windows, that might be located somewhere, and the file path might look like this. So it's just in your normal documents directory. Then you might have a folder called Blender, and then a project folder, and then you put it in textures. There you go. On Mac, it might look like this. The main difference between Windows and the other operating systems is that the separator character between directories is a backward slash, and on Mac and Linux it's a forward slash. So that adds more complexity to this. But yeah, this is what a absolute file path might look like. And then Blender has this concept of a relative file path, and that might look like this. And as you can see, it starts off with a double slash, and we will talk about that a little bit later, what that means. But it's, as you can see, it's a lot shorter than the other one. But if I give you this file path and I tell you, yo, check out this amazing texture on the computer, you have no idea where the texture is actually located. You only you have the relative file path. And I think I have like a dictionary kind of definition about what is absolute and what is relative. And absolute means it's independent and it doesn't depend on anything else for it to mean something. Relative means doesn't mean anything by itself. It depends on something else. So it relies on another thing, and it's relative to something. So you need something else, and that's what we will talk about. What this double slash is. So in Blender, you need something else. If I tell you go check out this texture, you don't know where it is. If I tell you go check out this texture at this absolute file path, you can find it. So that is the difference between absolute and relative. So in Blender, we got this double slash. What that means is Blender replaces this double slash with the location of its own blend file, of the current open blend file. So that does not mean the file path to the blend file. It means only the location. So that's the first part. That's the directory of where the blend file is located. It will take that and it will replace the double slash with that. So if your blend file is located here, and this is a Linux flavored file path, but if your blend file is located in Documents, Blender, and then called inside of a project folder called Monkey Project, and it's called animation.blend, the location will be this. It will be the Monkey project folder, and it will take that and replace. When it looks at a relative file path, it will take that. It will replace the double slash with the project folder, and then we end up with the absolute file path. That we get back to that. So relative is a bit more complicated than absolute. Then why would you ever use relative file paths? That is because relative file paths solve one important problem that absolute file paths have. Absolute file paths are problematic because, say you rename something, or you want to move your project folder around on your computer, or you want to rename your project folder. If you do that, all your absolute file paths will have to change as well for them to work, because I go into an example here. What if you want to rename your project directory from Monkey Project to Suzanne Project? Then this absolute file path to the banana texture will not work anymore, because it's referencing the Monkey project folder. So you will have to come in and change that to Suzanne Project and then fix it. And if you have a lot of textures, this is a pain. So even if you're working by yourself, if you want to just restructure your project, absolute file paths can be a problem. So what about relative file paths? Do they have this same problem? Not really, because the relative file paths only looks at textures banana, and whatever comes before is this dynamic location of the blend file. So if you rename your project folder, the location of the blend file automatically changes, and the meaning of this double slash automatically gets updated as well. So the banana texture is relative to the blend file located here, and that doesn't change if you move your project folder around or if you rename it. The absolute file path will have to change, the relative doesn't. So that is the benefit of relative paths. Let's say you want to collaborate with someone else and you want to share your project among, you want to share your project with someone on a different computer, all you need to do is make sure they get your project folder with the same contents. And it doesn't matter where on their computer they store it. It doesn't matter if they are using Linux or Windows, if they have a C drive or a D drive or something else, or an external hard drive. It doesn't matter. As long as the external files and the textures are using relative file paths, they will still work. So that is the reason that Blender has this concept of relative file paths. And even though they're a little bit more confusing, they have a lot of benefits. So that is relative file paths. I hope that makes sense. Then there is something else about relative file paths that I wanted to cover, and that is you have this magic double slash that has a certain meaning, which is the location of the blend file. You also have something else that's slightly magical, and this is not Blender specific. If you're familiar with using assets on a website, for example, they use the same conventions, but a double period and a slash means go up one directory level. And sometimes you see this pattern in your relative file paths. And sometimes Blender, if you're moving files around, Blender has a lot of these double period slash sequences in the relative file paths. And if you have too many, it makes the relative file path brittle as well. And I want to show this. Maybe it's better to show this in Blender and show you how to fix it. So I have one example here. So if you know that, given that this is going up one directory, you could start your relative file path like this, where you have a double slash, which is the location of the blend file. Then you need to go up one level because maybe your blend file is located in a subdirectory called 3D. And you have your blend file in a subdirectory called 3D, and you have your textures in a textures directory. Then you need to first go up one level to the project folder level, and then you go down into the textures folder. That's why you need this sometimes. But sometimes Blender does adds a redundant amount of those, and that's what you can see here. We have two. We go up one level, and then we go up another level, and then we go into the. So now we are in the Blender directory. Then we go down into the project folder. Then we go down into textures, and it works. But what if you rename your project folder? Then this relative path also breaks. And it's not necessary. We can change it back to this, and it's still a working relative path. So maybe it's better to go into Blender and actually show an example of this. So I have this demo file, and I also have, a example project here that's in my documents, Blender. Let's say this is my project folder. And if I look inside, I have a folder called, I have my blend file, and I have a folder called textures with one texture. And this particular file has multiple textures, but all of the textures are packed into the blend file, which is another useful thing that you can do if you want to share your blend file or render it on a render farm. It's very useful if you pack your external files into the blend file. Let's look at this tablecloth PNG, and we can look at it. We can look at it from the rendering view. Here we can see all our images, and we have multiple textures, but I just made this tablecloth texture. I unpacked it and I put it in a real file. And as you can see, we got the double slash So this means it's a relative file path. So we are starting at the blend file location, then we go into textures, and there we have our file. If we look back at the Finder, we can see we have our blend file. We go in, that's inside of this directory, and then we can go into textures and tablecloth. That makes a lot of sense, right? And if you change this, if you forget to add the textures, you can see it says can't load image, and this image, this texture will be broken and it will be pink. It will be rendered as pink like this. So that's not good. Let's undo that. And so this is what the relative file path looks like. If you want to know what the absolute file path would look like, you can go into File, External Data, and you can make all paths absolute. And that changes the file path, and we can expand this. Now it's referencing the entire path on my computer. So it's going into Documents, Blender, then the project folder, textures, tablecloth. But if we now rename this, it will break, and I can demonstrate this. Let's save the blend file, quit out of it, go back into our project, and we rename this to Missing Texture Project. Then we open the blend file back up, and now it says can't load image, because we are still looking at Missing Texture Example instead of Missing Texture Project. So we could fix that manually by doing this, and then it works, but that's a pain. So let's change it back to a relative path, and that looks a lot cleaner, a lot simpler. And let's save it, quit back out of it, go back, and let's rename this again to Awesome Texture Project, and open it back up. And as you can see, it still works because we didn't mention the project folder name anywhere here. So this is a lot more robust this way. And by the way, before I forget, this is one of the demo files, and I should give credit to Nicole Morena, Nikki Blender on ArtStation. Go check it out. She made this, but I thought it was a cool example to show a missing texture. But yeah, that is the relative absolute file paths. So let's look at this example with the double dot. In this case, we don't need a double dot because the blend file is in the root of our project folder, so we can dive straight into textures. But what if this blend file was in a subdirectory? Then you would need it. But sometimes Blender ends up adding these redundant double dots. So our project folder is called Awesome Texture Project. So let's copy that, and we can change our relative file path to something a bit redundant, but let's go up one directory by adding the double dot and another slash. And then we go into, now we are one level above our project. So that's we're now in the Blender folder. So now we have to go back down into our project folder and then add another slash and then go into textures. So if I hit enter, it should still work. Yeah. So now our full path looks like this, and it's a bit redundant, but it still works, right? If we add you can see this is not working, but if you fix it, this is still working. But now if we rename our project folder, this path will break. Or if you upload your textures and your blend file to Blender Grid, this will break because you are not uploading the Awesome Texture Project directory. So if you upload this to Blender Grid, Blender is going to be on our servers and it's going to look for this directory somewhere, but it's we don't have that. So what you can do to fix this, if Blender has a bunch of this, you don't have to manually do it. There is a way to, it's kind of a hacky way, but it works well. So you go to File and you first make all the paths absolute. That puts it back to this. This will definitely break if you try to share this with someone else whose name is not Richard. They will not have a directory called users Richard, so this will break. But now we change it back to relative, and then it's back to our nice and short relative path. And that's because Blender just takes the most efficient relative path that it can find. So there is no need to go up one directory and go back down into the directory we were already in, right? So yeah, that is how you fix that. You first make them absolute, then make them relative, then save the blend file, and now you have the shortest possible relative path. And now you can just take the textures and the blend file, upload it to Blender Grid, and it will work. And maybe we can just show that. So here I just uploaded only the blend file, and then you get this warning. Oh, and there's also unbaked particle systems. I didn't know about that, but you will have missing textures, and the name of the file is tablecloth, and it's located here. It's missing. But what you can do now is just take the textures and the blend file, and you can simply zip that up, for example, as a zip file, upload that, and now it's going to check, and we should not have any warnings now. So yeah, that is, now we've covered relative file paths, absolute file paths. That's very key to know. And we've covered the relative file paths. You might think, oh, my file paths are relative, it should be good, but you might have all these double dots with slashes in there that are redundant. Sometimes you need them, sometimes there's no other way and you need that pattern, but sometimes you just go up a level and then go down into the same directory that you were already in before. And that doesn't make sense. So, and now, as you can see, we don't have any warnings about missing textures with our zip file. So that is, this is before, this is after. And now you can render this. And you might want to fix the particle systems that were not baked. But this project in particular is only a still image. So then you generally don't need to bake your particle systems if it's only a still image. So that is external files. And of course, there are a lot more different types of external files. But the most important thing I wanted to cover in this video was the difference between relative and absolute file paths, and how to handle file paths, how to manage it, how to fix file paths by setting them, making them absolute and then relative again, so that Blender kind of cleans them up. And this applies to any external files that you might have. But if you're only dealing with single textures, like a single image textures, not an image sequence or a movie, then there is this little button that allows you to pack the image into the blend file. And you can do that per image, or you can do it for all images by going to external data, pack resources. And that, as you can see, now it shows a little packed icon. And now it's just packed into the blend file. And that might be the easiest way to share your stuff around. The benefit of having it as a separate file is that if you're still working on the texture and you might use a separate program like Photoshop to work on the texture, you can work on the external file and then just refresh Blender and it will reflect the update. Once you pack it into the blend file, that doesn't work anymore. But yeah, this is what the demo file came as with all the textures packed. So that's one final thing I wanted to show. Like, this is how you pack the texture, and now it's just packed into the blend file. The blend file is slightly bigger because it adds the PNG into it now. But yeah, that is external files. That is how file paths work. That is what I wanted to share. I hope that makes sense. I hope that if files were confusing before, file paths in Blender, I hope you have a little bit better understanding now. And yeah, hope to see you in the next video.